How can you get unstuck and find your happiness again? Welcome, everyone, to the Cope and Chill podcast, where every Tuesday we explore practical approaches to self-care and self-healing for better emotional and mental health and well-being. And I'm your host, Ron Martin. Thank you for joining us. And come join us on our Facebook page, the Cope and Chill podcast, on Instagram at Cope and Chill, and on YouTube at Cope and Chill, and on our website, copeandchill.com. We are on a mission to make awareness about practical approaches to emotional and mental health and well-being as accessible as we possibly can. And stay tuned for additional content coming your way. And as always, please don't forget to like and subscribe or leave a comment wherever you're listening to us from. Have you ever had a dream for a better life, but deep down, you don't really feel like you could ever get there? You know, that thing that really lights you up inside, but just seems so out of reach. Perhaps it's a new career, a new relationship, or maybe living in another country. What's that thing that deep down inside you really believe is the thing that's meant for you? But there's just so much that seems to be in the way of getting there. We come up with all kinds of reasons as to why it can't happen. And these things just make so much sense to us as we think about them. Perhaps if we do that thing that we wanted, it will fail for one reason or another. Or that you'll be criticized. Or that you feel that going down that path, given where you are in life, is just so irresponsible and difficult. What do all these seemingly rational reasons have in common? Well, what's underneath them isn't rationale at all. In fact, in most cases, we don't really ever make decisions based on logic or rationale. Our decisions, more often than not, are based on emotion. But we use rationale or logical thinking to align our emotions or make sense of them. We, quote, feel better when the logic makes sense. Don't believe me? When buying a home or a car, how do you decide which one to buy? Is it based on how it looks or how it makes you look? That's emotional. Is it based on cost or size or maybe something else that's quantitative or rational? Well, think about what that means for a moment. If it's something you can afford, the math works out, yes. But it is also something that, at the end of the day, you can live with, you feel comfortable with. That because you are comfortable, you won't be anxious about it. That's emotion. So emotion is at the base of most decisions. The challenge is that oftentimes our emotions can seem so real and a part of who we are that we can't separate ourselves from them. In other words, we believe them so fiercely that we can't see them for what they are, emotions. And because we identify with them so closely and can't see them as something separate, they show up to us as immovable objects in the very solid form of fear, self-doubt, and maybe feelings of unworthiness that prevent us from moving forward. But where do these self-sabotaging emotions that block our progress and impact our decision-making come from? Surely we weren't born with them. Where do they come from and why do they stay with us? And then how do we see them for what they are so that we can work with them and move beyond them to the life we so deeply desire? Well, that is the topic of today's discussion with Stephanie Cornelisse, who is a self-described female embodiment mentor who helps high-achieving women step out of the cycle of overworking, being constantly busy, and feeling exhausted from overthinking and living inside their heads all the time. She helps them connect with their bodies to become the most expanded versions of themselves. Stephanie is passionate about all women coming back to their natural flow state of trust, surrender, and attraction so that they can live life with ease and flow. which she teaches in her yin yoga retreats, workshops, and mentorship journeys. After working with Stephanie, women feel whole within themselves, comfortable in their skin, and proud of whom they are with oozing confidence. Today's episode is both powerful and empowering for both women and men. Men, trust me, you can get something from this too. And so I invite you to keep listening to our discussion about how to get unstuck and find your happiness again. And as always, please like and subscribe or leave us a comment wherever you're joining us from. Thank you. And now, here's Stephanie Cornelisse. Welcome, everyone, to the Cope and Chill podcast. I have here with me today Stephanie Cornelisse, and she is a female embodiment mentor who empowers high-achieving women who are stuck in their heads move back into their flow and ease connected to their bodies. I don't know if I exactly said that right, but maybe you can just tell us what it is that you do, Stephanie. How do you help women, and why do they come see you?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's really lovely. Usually women come to me when they feel stuck in their lives or when they repeat patterns over and over again and they can't seem to figure out why. And they overthink a lot, most likely, and they feel some anxiety around things. And what I see often, and why I think embodiment is so important, is that a lot of us and a lot of women are floating outside of their bodies. So if you relate that back, for example, to early childhood, and maybe it's never been really safe to be in the body, and so the coping mechanism has been to float out of the body. When you float out of your body, you're really in your mind. You're really overthinking because you're not really connected to your heart or your body. So
Okay.
what I help my
So when we say we're outside of our body, we're floating outside of our body, what we're really saying is that we're really driven by our minds, right? And a lot of the way we're sort of taught and encouraged to be in Western culture is to really rely on the mind for so much of what we're talking about. And what you're saying is that the body has information and it has the ability to communicate to us about what's right for us. A lot of ways, some people use the word intuition or inner knowing. You're talking about helping people, or women in particular, reconnect to that. Is that right?
Yeah, because I believe that the heart is the portal into the soul. And when you are connected to your soul and your inner being, obviously it's so much easier to connect to your intuition and to really truly feel what it is that you want in life, to feel what is your purpose in life, and to feel your inner guidance system guiding you where you need to go. So it's much easier to see the signs, to feel that you are on the right path. But if you are so disconnected from your body and you're more so coming from a mind perspective, you're totally disconnected from your intuition, most likely. And that's what, creates obstacles in your life and why you keep repeating the same patterns over and over again.
So, okay, so let's talk about, you say that women come to you because they're stuck at a certain point in your life, and then you talk about repeating patterns. I presume there's a direct correlation between the two. So what kinds of patterns, what kinds that are people stuck in? What kinds of things do people come to you specifically to have help with?
Yeah, so usually all core beliefs relate back to unlovable, not good enough, not worthy. Like if you go deep enough in a belief and you do a lot of self-inquiry, you unpack, usually that's where it comes from. And what I really see with my clients is that most of the time, these energetical imprints are made early on in childhood. So from ages 2 to 10, sorry. And quite often, what I also see with my clients is that those energetical imprints are not even theirs to start with. So this is where we start tapping into generational trauma too, right? So if, for example, something happens in the childhood and the mom doesn't feel good enough or not feel worthy, then as children, we are so energetically open that we can't see the difference between what's theirs and what is ours. But what I also see is that it doesn't have to be major trauma. For example, one of my clients was needed to be in the family photo, and mom was like, okay, you need to be in this family photo. And she was like, I don't want to. And mom goes, no, it's important. You need to be in this family photo. And boom, the installment is made that her feelings aren't valid. So whatever she feels, it doesn't matter. She needs to do things anyway. And then if we look back at how things like that then manifest later in our lives, or if we look at what's the science behind patterns, we can then see that we all have this RAS filter system in the brain. It's the reticular activation system. And what this system does is it filters out over 90,000 impulses on a daily basis, which is way too much for our brain to comprehend, right? So we have this filter system in place to make sure that we can go about our day and see the most important things. But a good example of that could be if you want to buy a red car, for example, and you go out on the street and all of a sudden you see red cars everywhere, right? So this RAS filter system is basically just affirming something that is unconsciously already there, because all of a sudden it's like, oh, look, there's another red car. Oh, look, there's another red car. Oh, look, there's another red car. But this also works with beliefs. So for example, if there's a belief that's being installed, like my feelings aren't validated, then what happens is that this RAS filter system will just filter out experiences that just affirm to you that that is true. Oh, see, your feelings aren't validated. Oh, see, your feelings aren't validated. Oh, see, your feelings aren't important. So what I do with my clients is that we go back to when were those beliefs firstly installed and how did you get those beliefs? Are they yours or not yours? And then we rewrite those beliefs and rewrite those unconscious patterns so that now the new installed belief is my feelings are important. So that now this RAS filter system will reflect back to you that that is true in your external reality.
Okay, so look, I want to pause right there because you said a lot, and I want to make sure everybody's tracking along with us. So, if I take from what you said, if I understand it correctly, so what we're saying is that as a child, and I certainly had some of these things growing up myself. Many people do, where, yeah, I mean, I remember going with my mother to, she had to go shopping somewhere, and I didn't want to go. And so I found myself just sitting, like, finding a bench in the store while she was shopping and just having to sit there and entertain myself. We didn't have the internet back then or anything like that or devices. So I'm just trying to figure out how to keep myself busy, bored out of my mind because I didn't want to be there. But in the end, there may have been this imprint establishing that, what I wanted didn't really matter, was secondary, right? And I think fast forwarding, what you're also saying that is that you then start, because this belief is imprinted, you then start looking for things that are, I think you were saying, that confirm that belief, right? And I would use the word that's familiar to you, right? Because it feels very familiar to what you experienced before, and it aligns with what you believe about yourself because of the thing that you went through. And so therefore, as you're going through your adult life, as you're looking for these confirming experiences, they may show up in terms of career choices and partner choices and other things like that. So do I have this right? Is this where we're going here?
Yeah, exactly. Although I have to say that most of the time, things like this happen unconsciously. So we have 95% of the brain works unconscious, and only 5% of that is actually conscious. So a lot of people don't know where those beliefs come from. And they also don't know that that's actually what's dictating their reality, because it's deep in the unconscious and there is no awareness of it.
Yeah.
Yet.
And so you and I talked before the show, and I likened it to a computer program. In other words, that as we're children, that we're being programmed like a computer is programmed, like you have a computer program that's being built inside of you. And so that when you're an adult, you kind of, if you're not aware, if you're not intentionally trying to become aware and perhaps modify the patterns, the program that's inside of you, you tend to live that program out in life, right? You actually act it out in reality.
Exactly.
So it's almost like a script, right? And so, yeah, go ahead.
And this is also where triggers come in. Something happens and it's triggering you. It's basically just, activating this program that you already have there. And then the program auto responds to the trigger. So what is really interesting in that is that we have to become aware of the fact that, hey, okay, I am triggered right now. And I literally just did a whole masterclass about this, about self-regulation, because triggers in my eyes are actually beautiful, beautiful, beautiful gifts where we get to look at ourselves and we can see what is actually being triggered, and then look at that with so much love and compassion, because it's just something that needs to be that needs light. It's just something that is in the shadow that wants to be seen.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is, so when you say trigger, it's almost like that thing that actually causes that program to kick in, and it shows up as us just reacting blindly, and we say things and we do things that we might regret because we just auto respond based on that trigger that we just experienced. But, I think the other thing is that you said is it's information. It's something that if we look at it the right way and we stop and pay attention to it and reflect upon it, it's an opportunity for us to notice that, hey, perhaps that reaction that I did was not only painful for the other person, but it was also painful for me too. And so is this something that if I slow down enough and pay attention to it and have the right tools, can I redirect this or rewrite this program, if you will? How do you help people do that? Obviously, they're
So
coming to you.
basically,
Yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead.
so just going back there just a little bit, there's also such a big difference between reacting and responding, right? Because if we have a beautiful, if we have self-inquiry and we just pause for a moment and just literally ask ourselves, okay, I'm feeling triggered right now, but what am I really feeling? Because then oftentimes, if you truly ask yourself this question, it will always come back to, well, I'm not feeling heard, I'm not feeling seen, I'm not feeling important enough. It always comes back to this.
There's a
And then
deeper
if
belief underneath it.
yes, and also like, like I just said, if you've experienced something like that in your childhood throughout your life, you have attracted, or like you said, things that are familiar for you over and over and over and over again, that belief is true. So of course there's an auto response, right? So what I do with my clients is that we travel back onto their timeline. It's called emotional change technique. We go back onto their timeline all the way to the very first time when that was first imprinted. So the very first installment. And then we're having a look at that energetical imprint of like, okay, first of all, who was involved? What were they feeling at the time? What feelings were you feeling? Because I believe the first thing for this, and this is also coming back into the body, so clearing out this energetic container in our vessel so it becomes safe again to come back into our bodies, is you got to feel it to heal it. So we go back in time. So the clients move through the feeling of what they were feeling at the time to heal it. We install a new belief and what resources they actually needed as their younger self. And we have a look at all the people that were imprinted in there, all the people that were involved in that energetical imprint to see, hey, was it yours or was it not yours? And if it wasn't yours and your parents were going through something at the time, now this is a beautiful moment to reflect and also find understanding and forgiveness, because I always tell my clients, our parents did the best that they could do with the
Yes.
resources they had at the time, right?
Yes, that's
And
right.
also, this is where we get to move out of a victim mentality into a self-accountability mentality, where it's like, okay, cool, I feel everything that happened, but I'm not a victim of it. And I'm choosing to make it into a beautiful lesson now that I get to learn and move through. Because I think a lot of people, unfortunately, are quite it's quite easy sometimes to point a finger at things that have happened to you maybe when you were younger, because it's difficult and it's hard to actually feel those emotions and feel those feelings. However, no power comes from that place. So it's actually empowering to take accountability and responsibility for the way you feel and do something about it, and start working with a mentor, start clearing out your energetic container, and not just for you, but also if you were to have children or you are a future parent, then you also don't want to pass this on to the next generation, because then you're doing the exact same thing. You're energetically imprinting your children also with those beliefs.
In the same way, and that's the generational trauma. That's a term that's being used quite a bit these days. So if, and I had a question here and I should have written it down, but you talk a lot about the having a belief, or I guess an energetical imprint that's maybe not yours, and being able to go back and revisit that. People tend, and you also said this, people tend to want to sort of reside in victimhood. Why do you think that people like to do that, as opposed to taking or going down the path that you're suggesting, where they can become more empowered, where they can kind of look at what happened to them a bit differently and pursue a different path? Why do you think that the victimhood thing is something that people tend to rely on or go back to quite often?
Because it's comfort zone. If it's something that's all you've ever known and it's all you've ever done, then it's your comfort zone. And I call this is a beautiful reframe that I use with my clients, and it's a beautiful tool actually for your listeners as well. It's called contraction and expansion. So the contracted version of ourselves wants to stay the same. It doesn't like to go outside of the comfort zone. It wants you to just stay safe where it is, because those mechanisms have been in place for such a long time for safekeeping, even though right now in your adulthood, they might not do anymore what they once did, so once they did keep you safe, but now you actually no longer need that. But it is also a safekeeping, and so therefore it's keeping you in this comfort zone, which also is the reason why you repeat the same patterns over and over again, because you're trying to have a different outcome by doing the same thing, which obviously doesn't work. So you have to do something different to get a different outcome, right? So I speak a lot about this with this contracted version of ourselves, but then we also have the most expanded version of ourselves. And you can look at the most expanded version of yourself as your soul guidance or your inner being or your intuition. And this expanded version of you wants to change, wants to break free from the patterns, wants to see a different outcome. But sometimes we have to move through the uncomfortability to get there, right? Which is moving outside of the comfort zone, where growth lies, and courage and wisdom. And for some people, that's really scary because they've never explored what that is like outside of their comfort zone. So of course there is the unconscious mind that wants to hold on to this like contracted version of us, or the lower self, like some people call it, and I think that's often why people find it difficult to revisit those things or to make a change.
Yeah, and I think it's easier to just avoid the discomfort, right? And you say it's scary because you don't know where you're going if you kind of take that on your own, which might be why some people might want to work with someone like yourself, because you can help guide them. But if you're facing that fear of trying to overcome that comfort zone of victimhood, right, you're going to encounter probably some difficult emotions, some discomfort, all of that. And that can feel like too much to some people sometimes. And perhaps that requires having a different relationship with your emotions, right? So that you see that discomfort isn't something necessarily to be afraid of or avoided, but maybe to be embraced, maybe to be worked with, maybe to be extended some compassion so you can actually move through it in a more comfortable way. But that requires a change in relationship, I think, with your emotions. So what are some of the techniques that you use other than you talked about a few mental or cognitive techniques, but what are some of the other things that you do to help people return to their body and get connected to themselves?
Yeah, so I work a lot with energies and the frequencies, for example. So if people are carrying with them these lower, denser frequency energies like anger, sadness, fear, grief, guilt, like it's really important to move through that, because emotion also stores in the body, right? So it's really important to also move through that and to release that. And I get people to re-explore the relationship with their bodies, because oftentimes we can say, oh, I don't trust my body gets sick, and it responds this way if I eat that. But I think people never really look at like, hey, but does my body actually trust me? And that's a whole new reframe to look at that, because how often in the past are you eating something and your body is actually saying, hey, this doesn't feel good to me, but you still do it because it tastes nice? What signal are you actually sending to your body that you're doing something to your body that your body's signaling to you doesn't like? And it's the same for a lot of women that I speak to as well. And I suppose, as women, like maybe we've been programmed a little bit to when we have sexual intercourse or whatever, sometimes we already do it even though we don't want to, or even though we are not ready to fully receive yet, but we still go ahead with it because we get out our self-image and self-love from it, and our self-confidence, to feel desired and loved, but maybe we're not ready to receive yet, or we actually kind of don't want to, but we still do. So how many times have we dishonored our bodies in the past, or how do we speak to our bodies with shame and not liking the way we look because we've got such a high standard of what it should look like? So a lot of the taskings and a lot of things that I work on with my clients is to really restore the relationship with their body, so it becomes a safe place again. So the trust is being restored in that. And what I wanted to add on to that as well is like just touching base on what we were saying before. Imagine having a backpack on your back, right? Which is already quite heavy. But if we keep looking back to where we came from and we keep looking at the past, like this victim mentality, for example, we will never look at where we are going because we're not focused. So we're not looking at where we are going. We just keep looking at the past, which means that you're consciously choosing to not break yourself free from the past. And you could break free from it if you choose to. So this is where you can really tap into, like, hey, me not wanting to break free from the past, is that my contracted version of me, or is that my expanded version of me? And what would my expanded version of me do? Because you have one life, why not live it in the best way possible? And it is possible for everyone.
Mm-hmm. I want to, you gave some great examples there, by the way, but I want to go back to, just to help our audience a bit here. When we talk about, because this is something that I learned maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. I think I've always felt it for decades, really, in my own personal experience, but that the body stores trauma and emotions. And so I want to help people sort of understand what that means. So for me, I know that so even right now, it's like, the tense shoulders, right? And the pain in the shoulders because my shoulders are tense and uptight, or maybe it's the chronic stomach upset, or maybe it's lower back pain that's chronic, right? Our bodies, well, you tell me. So what is that? So we know it's emotion trapped in the body, at least in my example, I know that. But like, what is the connection? I mean, what am I, why is it persistent? Why am I holding on to it? Right? How does this whole thing work?
Yeah, so it's like when something happens to you when you were younger, for example, or even when you're older, and you haven't learned properly how to move through an emotion and how to really feel the emotion, that it's okay to feel, and it's your coping mechanism is and everyone has different coping mechanisms, right? Like for a very long time, my coping mechanism was working. So I would just focus everything all on work, and then I didn't have to deal with my issues. Other people use drugs, other people drink. It's just coping mechanisms. But if you look at, for example, traditional Chinese medicine, it really speaks into how every major organ holds an emotion. So the liver holds anger, the lungs hold grief, the kidneys hold fear. So these are all emotions that are then stored in the body. And if we look at energetics, we have certain blocks in our system, because if something happens, the nervous system goes into a fight-flight response. So if you are someone that overthinks a lot and feels overwhelmed a lot and feels anxious a lot, obviously the brain sends a signal to the nervous system that basically says fight, flight, fight, flight, fight, flight. And so if you are in fight, flight mode, obviously you can't process emotions, right? Yeah. Only when you are in a rest and digest and restorative space in the body, you are actually able to process. Because imagine running away from a lion, but also in the meantime feeling your emotions. It doesn't work, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's really important to start working on calming down your nervous system, coming back to this beautiful rest and digest. And that is only possible oftentimes when we really start clearing out some of that stuff that's been there for such a long time, because the body is in constant overdrive trying to manage things whilst it's feeling all these emotions that are trapped, like you said before, in the body. So it's really important to move back in time to feel all the things that were there, that were stored in the body, so that it becomes safe again, so that the brain is not so overloaded and starts sending signals to the nervous system to be in rest and digest, which also means that if you are going through something now, that you can actually process it and it doesn't store in the body anymore.
Yeah. So bringing it back to my example in terms of what you just said, it's, and I think I'm aware of this. There's a persistent thought in my head, a feeling that very much relates to some relationships I had earlier in my life that were very traumatic. And so there is this sort of persistent fight or flight kind of thing going on in my head in social interactions as a result of that. And so physiologically, as you were going down that path, it's like my nervous system is saying, okay, it recognizes the thought that's in my brain and it's sending the signals to my body. And so the tense shoulders are a product of the either fight or flight, right? You've got to be ready to move, right? Because something dangerous is coming. So the tension is your muscles being in active mode, ready to kind of engage and do what it needs to do to protect the body. But that threat isn't there. And I think that's what you're saying, where it's like that trauma is stored, but that's not my reality. I'm sitting here talking to you. I'm in my home office, whatever. I'm drinking a cup of coffee. I'm perfectly safe.
but for some reason that persistent thought is still there, and that's what we need to process, or I would need to process and work through. Now, you mentioned move through your emotions. Tell us what that means specifically. When you say
Yeah,
move
so
through
what
it,
it
are we
means,
physically moving,
yeah.
or what are we doing here? Yeah.
Well, I think, it's a bit of a combination of a bunch of things. Firstly, just relating it back to you quickly, what you're feeling on your shoulders is also a lot of weight. You're feeling so much weight on your shoulders from something that you've carried probably for a very long time.
Yeah.
So that's the saying, right? There's weight on my shoulders.
Sure.
And like I just said, this heavy backpack that you're carrying, that's why a lot of people have this tension in their shoulders. Moving through something can be in different ways. So I think, first of all, when you're walking, you're actually distracting one part of the brain for the other part to move freely, for the unconscious mind to go. It's the same with writing in a journal. You're writing in a journal, so cognitively, you're distracting a part of your brain so the other part can just allow things to come through. That's why people often say, well, I start writing in my journal and everything just comes out. Another really, really, and the most important one I find is that when you have this feeling, allowing it to be there and actually checking in with your body, like, where is it sitting? Is it sitting in my throat area? Is it sitting in my chest? Is it sitting in my stomach? Where does it sit? And then just allowing that feeling to be there, because I've learned from a very young age, I guess, that I was always trying to suppress everything. And then I've seen many psychiatrists and group therapy and all these things in my younger years. And one of my psychiatrists said at some point, it's like a bouncing ball. So if you keep pressing the bouncing ball down, it will keep coming back. And and the more harder you press, the harder it comes back. So at some point, it wants to come out. The pressure needs to be released. So I think that's one of the most important things. You got to feel it to heal it, and really just allow those emotions to be there. It's okay.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because there was a really difficult period of my time in my life that I was going through maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, I think. Probably trying to avoid recognizing that time period, but nevertheless, it was a very difficult time for me emotionally. And I come across some work done by Kristen Neff, who does a lot of work with self-compassion. And there's a self-compassion meditation that she had developed called Soften, Soothe, and Allow. And that was very helpful to me, especially at that time. And I probably should go back to that particular meditation. But it's very much like what you said, which is acknowledging what's going on in your body and where it sits, but then allowing it to be there, being calm and kind to it and gentle, but not trying to force it to go away. Right. It's sort of like I've heard some other philosophers refer to it as befriending the emotion, as opposed to suppressing it and turning it into that ball that you're trying to push down. Because you're right, it actually always comes back. And I have noticed that in my own personal experiences, when I have been more mindful, of taking a more mindful approach to some of the emotions I'm experiencing and allow them to just experience them without judgment, then they tend to go away on their own. But for some reason, some of these more difficult, longer lasting things related to trauma, that hasn't worked as well thus far.
Yeah, it's also because, the body and the mind, they're trying to keep us safe at all times, which also sometimes means that emotions or heavy trauma or even memories are stored so deep in the unconscious that we can't really access it, right? So it's just because it's safekeeping, and it's just making sure that it protects us. It's very intelligent. The mind is super intelligent, and it's its own entity, right? So it's really important to realize that sometimes you might not know what's there. Sometimes, I, for a very long time, had some deeply rooted anger. And because I come from, so my family lineage, for example, we had lots of skin disease in our family, my mom's line. And it started manifesting for me as well when I was like end 20s. And I was like, okay, what is going on? I really don't want this, because this is like really bad psoriasis, right? My grandma had it really badly. My mom had it really badly. And I was like, I don't want this. But then I started looking deeper and deeper and deeper into the emotional cause of what was actually causing this disease, because I started having the same thing. And then I could relate it back to sexual trauma, which was, this deeply rooted anger that I was actually holding deep down inside of me, that wasn't just mine, but also traveled back generations. And I was the calmest person ever. Like, I did not think that I would have, this deeply rooted anger inside of me. And if anything, it made so much sense, because then I was like, wow, like, I was never really able to tune into anger. Like it would take someone a lot to really get me angry, because I wouldn't really get angry because
Yeah.
it was so suppressed for such a long time.
Yes. Yeah. It's sort of running in the background, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like I have that too. And I think a lot of people, if they met me and they have told me this, it's like they wouldn't expect that there's something that's deep in there that could be so pained, you know. But yeah, I mean that's the whole practice of like suppressing it, so you're avoiding it and not dealing with it. But all it does is just it continues to exist and churn and live in your body, and then sometimes shows up in terms of disease and other situations. So Stephanie, so we talked a lot about some of the ways that you work with people in terms of dealing with these emotional traumas and why they come to you. You also, I think it would be helpful to maybe touch a little bit on the plant medicine that you also use to help you. Is it combo? Is that how we pronounce it?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Correct.
tell the audience what combo is and how it works and how you use it with the people that you see.
Yeah, so Kambo comes from a giant tree frog from the Amazon, and basically we work with the secretion of Kambo. So it comes from the tribes. They've done this for thousands and thousands of years, and Kambo is a really good cleanse for the body. It's a physical detox. And so it's not a psychedelic or anything, but you definitely do need to sit in ceremony with like a practitioner that knows what they're doing, because it can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. But Cambo basically scans the whole body to see if there's any funguses, viruses, cancer, fertility issues it works on. And now what they've seen in the lab now is that Cambo contains about 16 different peptides. And all these different peptides work on different parts of the body. And if we look at normal antibiotics that you get at the pharmacy, also works with peptides, but they need to break open the cell. So the cell receptors need to be broken open, and then it cleanses out everything in the cell, included the good stuff. That's why you always need to have probiotics when you take antibiotics. That's because, it cleanses everything out. But what Cambo does is that our body somehow has a remembrance of what that is. And so because it resonates and it's from the same molecules, or the same, we are nature, right? So our bodies our cell receptors open beautifully, allowing chemo to come in to cleanse everything out. And one of these peptides, for example, is dermaceptin. And dermaceptin is proven to fight cancer cells actively. So what Cambo does is that it also scans the body and it clears panema, is what they call it. And it's basically a negative, dark energy that you might carry with you. And so Cambo is a very physical process. So there's a lot of purging involved. People might go to the toilet. It's not a comfortable process, I wouldn't say at all. But what I have experienced, and the reason why I found Cambo, is because I got a really bad staph infection from my ex-partner at the time. And for who doesn't know what that is, staph infection are basically massive boils that you get on your body, and they're really painful, which also for me tied back into, the anger, because I was literally over boiling, right, from this deeply rooted anger that I had inside of me. And I did one Cambo ceremony, and then my staph basically was gone, which to me was like, wow, that's amazing, because I tried so many topical creams. I tried so many antibiotics. Like I went to the doctor so many times, and it didn't help and it didn't work for me until I found Cambo. And that was for me a very big reason to look into it, which also, if you look at my work and what I do, and I talk a lot about the feminine energy and what it means and how it works with nature. And we look at nature and it's Mother Nature, Mother Earth, right? So she is so nurturing and she is so loving, and she holds so much beautiful wisdom for us that I really truly believe that we can really learn so much from her. And there's so much that we haven't even yet discovered,
Awesome. So Stephanie, this has been a fascinating conversation. You've really shared a lot of great information. Hopefully our audience was able to stay with us throughout, but fascinating stuff. But I really appreciate you being here. How can people find you if they wanted to work with you, or how would you want people to engage with you?
Yeah, so I mainly use my Instagram, which is Chava Wild Roots. So CHAVA_wild get_roots. People can also find me on Facebook, Stephanie Cornelisse, which I'm sure you'll put in the show notes for people to find my links.
Yes.
I'm also more than happy to share like a free masterclass on self-care regulation, like self-nurture and how to move through those triggers and what you can do when it comes to journal prompts. And yeah, what I usually do with my clients is I take them on beautiful 8-week journeys home to themselves. It's my signature program where I really deep dive into those beliefs when people were younger and what was installed there, and just clear out that energetic container that I spoke about before, so that they can attract a different reality, and so they can break through all the patterns that are either theirs or generational stuff. And yeah, I'm super passionate about it because I do believe that how you do, you are a ripple effect to the people around you. The work that you do on yourself really creates a massive impact on the people around you. And yeah, that's it. I love doing this work, and I'm very passionate about helping women. And I do also work with men sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. I
It
think
feels aligned.
I think it should be clear after the interview that you're predominantly focused on helping women. But I appreciate that distinction. So
yeah.
Thank you again for your generous offering of time. It was a really pleasure to speak with you today. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you were able to take some inspiration or something of value from today's show. To access all of the resources and links mentioned, please head on over to copeandchill.com or our video-based podcast on our YouTube channel at Cope and Chill, where you will find the show notes for today's episode. That's Cope and Chill, CopeandChill.com. And for information about upcoming episodes, check us out on Instagram at Cope and Chill. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you're joining us from YouTube, and leave a comment wherever you're joining us from. Please come back and join us again for next week's episode. But until then, take care of yourselves.